Someone tried to sell my house without telling me, so I bought their headquarters. And that was only the beginning. Ever wondered what happens when the wrong guy gets pushed too far by the wrong kind of HOA president? Let's just say, she thought she ruled the neighborhood, until the paperwork said otherwise. What began as a made-up fee turned into a courtroom brawl, a corporate chess match, and 1911 call that no one could have predicted. This story has it all: revenge, real estate, and reckoning. Stick around to the end and let me know in the comments, how far would you go if someone threatened your home? The lake was calm that morning, but the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt expectant, like something was coming. After 20 years of untangling other people's real estate disasters, fixing plans I never signed off on, this cabin was supposed to be my reward. At 42, I'd finally earned my escape, a place to unwind after years of managing short-term rentals, broken AC units, and fussy tourists. My own little retreat to fish in peace. The early sunlight danced across the water in a golden shimmer, reminding me exactly why I worked so hard to get here. Then came the phone call that appended it all. Some real estate agent I'd never met was on the other end of the line, sounding puzzled. "Excuse me, are you the owner of the property at 47 Lakeshore Drive? Because we have it listed for sale in our database, and there's a lot of interest." At first, I thought it was a joke, a really elaborate prank, but no, they were seriously trying to sell my house like it was a used coffee table. The agent was calm and professional, like she was talking about the weather, not dropping a bomb on my entire life. She knew everything: the number of windows, the exact shade of green I'd painted the shutters last summer, even the cedar swing I'd just installed out back. Someone had walked through my private home like they owned it, and I had no idea. I nearly dropped the phone as the reality set in. It didn't feel real. I kept waiting to wake up or snap out of it, but she was dead serious. She even brought up the dock repairs I'd done, the stone path I'd laid with my own hands, and even the brand of the patio furniture I'd picked out last spring. I called Frank Delaney right away. We've been friends since college, and he's the kind of real estate attorney who actually picks up when things go sideways. Within an hour, Frank was combing through property records and dialing people I'd never even heard of. What he discovered made my coffee turn to acid. The HOA run by President Lois Granger had secretly and unlawfully listed my cabin for sale. No notice, no permission, nothing. Frank's voice was tight with fury when he called back. Into decades of property law, he'd never seen anything this outrageous. "This is criminal," he kept saying. Literally criminal. Turns out, when Frank confronted them, they already had some ridiculous explanation lined up. Lois claimed I owed a community landscape enhancement fee, exact amount, $3,847, from 3 years ago, a fee I'd never heard of, never received a notice about, and certainly never agreed to. According to her twisted logic, that phantom debt gave them the right to put my home up for sale and collect on it. Frank had scoured every HOA document, the bylaws, the minutes, the charters, and that fee? It was nowhere to be found, completely made up. Like some bureaucratic sleight of hand, I decided to call Lois directly, expecting defensiveness or at least guilt. Instead, she answered with this sugar-sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Mr. Bishop, I'm so glad you called. We don't want this situation any more than you do. Some of us still care about protecting this community, Mr. Bishop, even if others have forgotten what that means." Her voice dripped with fake warmth, but underneath every word was iron. At 54, Lois had mastered the art of using charm as a weapon. She sounded like a preschool teacher gently scolding a child, except what she was really saying was that she owned me. Every pause felt deliberate, like she wanted her words to sink in and sting. By that same evening, she'd started her smear campaign. Word was spreading among neighbors that I was a freeloader, a guy who refused to pay his dues and disrespected the neighborhood. The shift was immediate. People I'd known for years wouldn't make eye contact. Conversations ended when I walked by. Curtains twitched when I stepped outside. I waved at a guy I'd helped fix a busted pipe for last winter. He looked straight through me, like I'd become part of the background. Whatever narrative Lois was pushing, it was taking hold, and every cold shoulder felt like a silent verdict. At the grocery store, at the gas station, even at the marina where I kept my little fishing boat. By nightfall, I could feel the entire town turning against me. That evening, I sat out on the deck, property deed in hand, jaw clenched. The same sunset that gave me peace that morning now felt like it was laughing at me. As I stared at the lake, something clicked. 2 years ago, my old neighbor suddenly packed up and left after a dispute with the HOA. Back then, I didn't think much of it. People move, right? But now, with Lois's scheme in full view, I couldn't help but wonder, was he another target? Another victim of fake fees and whispered lies? The thought chilled me. What if I wasn't the first? I'm not someone who picks fights, but if someone plants a table in the wrong spot, you can bet I'll move it back. Later that night, a survey appeared in my mailbox, anonymous, of course, asking loaded questions about problem residents and community standards. Just after dinner, I caught someone snapping photos of my cabin from a slow-rolling car. The siege had started. Quiet, precise, designed to isolate me and make me second-guess everything. That day began with mist and coffee. It ended with threats, public shame, and a question no one had dared ask Lois Granger before. What happens when the man you try to erase pushes back? Frank and I spent the next several days reviewing every document I'd ever signed with the HOA. We highlighted, cross-checked, rejected, and annotated every fee and assessment from the last 5 years. Frank's conference table looked like something out of a detective show, paperwork everywhere, each sheet, a clue. Each note, a trail. Frank's findings were damning. That so-called landscape enhancement fee, it was fiction. It didn't show up in legal filings, community votes, or meeting records. It existed only in Lois's mind. We printed out the entire property map and pinned it to his whiteboard. We marked every lot where someone had suddenly moved out. 13 red dots appeared before my hand started shaking too much to continue. Each dot was someone who'd left under Lois's so-called leadership. The pattern was obvious now. Frank called an ex-treasurer who had resigned halfway through his term 2 years ago. All he said was, check the clubhouse lease. That's where the rot started. Then he hung up. That's when we knew we were finally digging into something real. Frank found the entry in the lease registry. That's strange, he said. The clubhouse isn't owned by the HOA. It's held in a trust. We didn't know what that meant yet, but it felt like the first crack in their armor. We spent the next hour researching HOA abuse cases, looking for precedents. What we found, a gold mine. Then came the emotional gut punch. A neighbor I'd known for 5 years, shared cookies with, carried groceries for, stopped me near the mailbox. Grant, she said, I heard you're having money problems. Is that why the show's helping with your house? The pity in her voice cut deeper than anything. I started to explain, but halfway through, she was already backing away, gripping her shopping bag like I was contagious. The shame wasn't loud. It just lingered like mildew you can't scrub out. That night, walking home, I noticed the kids who'd been playing nearby fell silent when I passed. Even my shadow seemed to make people scatter. Through Frank's digging and quiet conversations with a few brave residents, the truth started rising to the surface. Lois wasn't just out to collect on an imaginary fee. She was out for control. And I was just her latest target. She tried to sell my prime lakefront cabin to her friend Margaret for $75,000 less than what it was actually worth, and then planned to split the difference between them. This wasn't just deceit, it was a calculated act of fraud, designed for personal gain. When Frank explained it all to me, I couldn't stay seated. I literally had to stand up and pace his office. The scale of her greed was that overwhelming. My cabin was valued at around $400,000. Her plan, offload it for $325,000 and pocket $25,000 under the guise of a finder's fee. We spent hours combing through market comparables, arming ourselves with hard data to make sure we were ready for her inevitable pushback, with everything documented so thoroughly that defending her scheme in court would be near impossible. Then things spiraled in a direction I never saw coming. I received a certified notice from the HOA, giving me just 7 days to vacate the cabin. Included was an absurd list of so-called violations, like something out of a fever dream. Infractions included non-compliant garden edging, unauthorized repairs to my dock, unapproved window coverings, and consistent non-payment of HOA fees. Half of these accusations didn't even make sense. I stared at the list thinking, what? Garden edging, what unauthorized dock work? The dock had passed a professional inspection and been permitted just 6 months earlier. And the garden borders, identical to every other house on the block. She was obviously grasping, reaching for anything that might stick, but even these flimsy claims could cause serious damage if I wasn't vigilant. Lois was going all in, fueling a narrative that I was a financial wreck, refusing to comply with community standards, and bound to leave in disgrace once the legal dust settled. This wasn't just about taking my property anymore. She was actively working to destroy my name, ensuring that when I vanished, no one would think to question it. That's when I started wondering, how many others had she done this to? That thought haunted me. The deeper I looked into the community's past, the more sudden departures I uncovered. 3 families, in just the last 5 years, had packed up and left abruptly following disputes with the HOA, all under similarly shady circumstances. I couldn't ignore the possibility that they had been targets of the same orchestrated theft I was now facing. At an emergency meeting in Frank's office, he gave me advice that changed the course of everything. "Grant," he said, "don't let emotion drive your next move. If you want to beat this, you have to wait for the perfect moment to act." Then, almost offhandedly, he added something that caught my attention immediately. "You know, I was digging into the HOA structure, and did you know the clubhouse isn't actually owned by them?" I wasn't sure where he was going, but Frank never threw out random facts. He always had a reason. He broke down his findings, and I could barely believe what I was hearing. The clubhouse, the heart of HOA operations, the venue for meetings and events, the symbolic seat of their power, wasn't owned by the HOA at all. It was the property of an old trust fund established decades ago. The HOA merely rented it on a month-to-month lease, and that lease, it was set to expire in 6 weeks. This, Frank said, is their Achilles heel. Whoever buys that building could control everything. He pulled up the listing on his screen. The asking price was $340,000, a hefty sum, but not unreachable with my savings and experience in property management. Sometimes the best way to defend is to go on the attack. And this looked like the perfect opening. Frank reminded me that this wasn't about payback. It was about leverage. Used correctly, I wouldn't just protect my cabin, I might end up saving the entire neighborhood from Lois's reign. Then he looked me square in the eye. "If we pull this off at the right time, you won't just keep your home. You'll take the ground right out from under her." I barely slept the night before the closing. Not because I was anxious, but because I kept replaying the look on Lois's face when she opened that letter. Frank connected me with Megan Hartley, a sharp, strategic real estate agent he trusted. At our first meeting, she dropped a bombshell. "Lois tried to sell the clubhouse 6 months ago," Megan told me. Swore me to secrecy. That was the moment everything clicked. Lois had known for months that her foundation was vulnerable. She just hoped no one else would find out. The fact that she'd been worried about this for so long told me exactly how devastating this move could be. Megan and I crafted a plan to keep my identity out of the deal. We registered the beer under a bland, forgettable name, Sunshine Property Holdings, tied to a P.O. box in Kansas. The paper trail was clean and boring, nothing that would draw attention. Frank's assistant took care of the filings like a pro, even handling verification calls as our purchasing agent. We set up a fake email, a masked voicemail system, everything airtight. Thanks to my years managing vacation properties, I was no stranger to commercial deals, leases, and tenant rights. All of that knowledge was about to pay off in a big way. This wasn't about winning some grand prize. I was just tired of being steamrolled by someone who twisted the rules to suit her needs. The timing worked out perfectly. The trust was desperate to sell. They'd been trying for 8 months, with no luck. When Sunshine Property Holdings came forward with a clean offer of $335,000 and verified funds, they jumped at it. I sent the offer in Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, they accepted. Closing was set for that Friday. One offer, one reply, one signature, and just like that, I owned the epicenter of their operation. That's what happens when two parties want opposite things. They wanted out, I wanted in. No complications. No contingencies. I parked across the street the next day, ball cap low over my eyes, and watched two board members stroll into the clubhouse carrying envelopes and a plastic tub full of cookies. They treated the place like sacred ground. Now, I was their landlord. The closing was surreal. Sitting in a sterile room, signing paper after paper that transferred ownership of the very place Lois had ruled from for years. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the same system she tried to weaponize against me. When the pen hovered over the final signature line, it felt oddly heavy. That line wasn't just a formality. Signing it marked the moment I stopped being a victim and became the threat. With each initial, I chipped away at their control until only my name remained on the title. After the keys were in my hand, the wave of satisfaction was almost dizzying. For the first time since this all started, I had the advantage. I spent that afternoon analyzing nearby commercial listings to back up the rent adjustment I was about to enforce. The following Monday, I sent a formal notice to the HOA via certified mail. My hands trembled slightly as I typed, not from fear, but from anticipation. Effective immediately, rent for the property at 123 Community Center Drive will increase to $4,500 per month, up from $1,500, aligning with local market values. Payment is due by the 30th of each month. I kept the tone professional and neutral. What I didn't say was that I'd thoroughly studied the comps, and $4,500 was still on the low end. I could picture Lois opening that letter at the next board meeting. Their current budget only allowed $1,500 for the space. No way they could absorb a $3,000 spike without either tripling dues or gutting services. Either move would turn the residents against her. She'd been so busy ruining my name, she forgot to secure her own position. Now she'd have to explain to everyone why their HOA fees were about to explode or why they were about to lose their clubhouse. Within hours, my phone lit up with calls from frantic board members. Some were outraged, others pleaded, a few just sounded stunned. One voicemail ended with, "Please ... we had no idea." She said it was temporary. Funny. That's always what they say when the walls start caving in. I didn't respond. I let every call go to voicemail and listened to them all, twice, savoring every note of panic. These were the same people who stood by silently as Lois tried to rob me. Now they wanted me to rescue them. One board member called 6 times in 2 hours, each message more frantic than the last. That evening, I sipped coffee on my deck and watched Lois's car speed past my driveway, heading for the clubhouse. You could practically feel the alarm radiating off her. No doubt she was calling urgent meetings, scrambling to identify who had blindsided her. I could only imagine the desperation in her voice, the fear as she realized her little empire was falling apart. Your move, Lois. Let's see how it feels when you have to follow the rules. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to show up. I just sent a rent notice and left her to explain why the throne now came with a $4,500 invoice. When I saw the thick certified envelope in my mailbox, I knew she wasn't just shaken, she was mobilizing. I opened it at the kitchen counter, the same spot where I'd signed the documents that made me her landlord. Gold embossed letterhead. Double underlined emergency community meeting. It looked more like a wedding invite than a summons. She was pulling every intimidation tactic in the book, even mailing it from an unfamiliar law office downtown instead of the HOA's usual box. The message was clear. Scare him before he ever walks through the door. That afternoon, I called Frank to make sure everything was in place, every document, every receipt, every timeline. This wouldn't be some neighborly sit-down. This was going to be a public spectacle, and she was choosing the battlefield. The emergency meeting was set for Thursday evening, and my official summons had arrived. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was meant to be a takedown. But I'd spent the entire week preparing, and I was ready. As people streamed into the clubhouse, which I now owned, though most didn't know it yet, there was a tangible tension in the air. The room reeked of overdone perfume and nervous energy. Overhead lights buzzed softly. I spotted a few neighbors I hadn't seen in months, arms crossed, watching everyone like court observers. The folding chairs had been arranged like a theater, all eyes on the podium, where Lois stood like a prosecutor. Someone even brought a gavel. Everything about the setup screamed trial, and I was the one in the hot seat. I caught people whispering behind cupped hands, some shooting glances when they thought I wouldn't notice. You could feel the electricity in the room. The battle lines had already been drawn. A few neighbors gave me subtle nods of encouragement as they walked by. About time someone stood up to her, one muttered, others looked unsure, maybe afraid, that if the HOA imploded, their property values would take a hit. The room was filled to bursting. People were standing along the walls, crammed into doorways. The rent increase had spread like wildfire, and everyone wanted answers. The tension was razor-sharp, and everyone knew this wasn't going to be civil. I couldn't help but notice that several people had come in clutching notebooks, as if they were here to take notes on my impending public embarrassment. A few already had their phones up, poised to record whatever fireworks were about to ignite. The room felt stiflingly warm, though that could have just been my pulse pounding in my ears. Sweat glistened on brows, yet no one dared step out and miss the unfolding drama. For a lot of these folks, this was probably the most thrilling thing to hit their quiet suburban lives in years. They weren't here to support anyone, they came for the spectacle. The clash, the thrill of watching someone be dragged down a notch. Lois had clearly been gearing up for this like it was the role of a lifetime. She couldn't be too blatant with her attacks, not with so many people around, so she crafted her narrative with care. She painted me as the outsider, someone who didn't understand or appreciate the values of the community. Someone prioritizing profit over the integrity that supposedly kept their neighborhood secure and thriving. Her voice stayed even, but I noticed how tightly she clutched her water bottle, her knuckles drained of color. Her pen clicked obsessively during others' comments, a small crack in her otherwise polished exterior. She came dressed for battle too, in a navy power suit that probably cost more than a month's mortgage for half the people there, her hair pulled back into a stern bun, evoking a judge ready to hand down a sentence. Every word, every pause was deliberate. She knew she had an audience and played her part to perfection. But if you knew what to look for, the cracks were visible: the slight shake in her hand, the flicker in her eye anytime someone spoke up for me, and a smile that never quite touched her eyes. Then, something caught me completely off guard. An elderly woman I didn't recognize stood up and came to Lois's defense. She praised Lois for keeping property values up and the community spotless for over a decade. Maybe we should be listening to her instead of letting one angry homeowner and do everything we've built, she said. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. That's when it hit me: I wasn't just going up against Lois. I was pushing against years of ingrained obedience. Years of people learning never to question her word. But then something unexpected shifted the room. A man I barely knew, an ex-dentist who once gave me a death stare for parking near the community sign, stood up. I believed her, he said, voice thick with emotion. And now I feel like an idiot. The room fell silent. I signed the petition against Grant last week, he continued. But after looking at these documents tonight, I think we've been duped. His voice trembled with fury, not at me, but at Lois, and at himself for being used. No need to yell. Paper speaks louder than pride, I said, placing the folder down. I laid it out piece by piece: deeds, forged fee sheets, fake bylaws with Lois's signature plastered across a regulation that didn't even exist. I provided indisputable proof: my legal ownership of the clubhouse, a made-up landscaping fee that was never approved or recorded, and copies of every attempt I'd made to resolve the cabin issue through the proper process. The crowd went silent. People started flipping through the paperwork, and I saw the realization slowly spreading across some of their faces. A 67-year-old retired teacher who'd served on the board for 8 years stood after reviewing the evidence. I've been on this board 8 years, he said slowly. And I swear to you, I've never heard of a community landscape enhancement fee, let alone voted on one. The statement hit like a lightning strike, one of Lois's own board members publicly contradicting her, and you could feel the balance of power shifting in real time. Lois's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. And strangely, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. She immediately turned to damage control. She claimed I was under federal investigation for tax fraud and outright lie. She threatened legal action for harassment and intimidation. She ordered the maintenance crew to change the locks on the clubhouse that very night, despite having no authority to do so. Finally, she shouted that the HOA would refuse to pay the higher rent and take the matter to court, calling it extortion. I let her rant without cutting in. Every word only made her seem more erratic to the crowd. When she finally stopped, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show any anger. I just stated the facts as calmly as I could. Rent is due by the 30th, I said. After that, we follow standard commercial eviction protocol. I placed a business card on the table. This is my security team. They'll ensure the property remains protected during the transition. Half the room looked stunned that I was following through. The other half, those quietly fed up with Lois's authoritarian grip, looked impressed. The meeting unraveled into chaos. Lois stormed toward the door, but not before delivering one last threat. This isn't over, Mr. Bishop. Not even close. She brushed past me without a word, but her eyes said it all. I hadn't just stripped her of control, I'd made her desperate. And desperate people don't just disappear. They come back swinging. October 3rd arrived bitter and sharp though. Kind of cold morning that carries a warning with it. I showed up 10 minutes early, parked across the street. Frank's assistant wore an oversized blazer and clutched clipboard like it was a badge of honor. The 30th had come and gone without a cent from the HOA, just as I figured. That morning, I arrived with a 3-person security crew and Frank's legal aid to act as our witness. It was time for a legal commercial eviction, and I had taken every step by the book. I'd barely slept the night before, replaying every scenario in my head, every legal curveball Lois might throw, every possible way things could go sideways. My team looked more like golf instructors than security, 2 middle-aged guys in palas, and a woman who specialized in eviction documentation across 3 counties. They were calm, experienced, and fully briefed. I warned them about Lois, how she might try to provoke a reaction that would paint me as the aggressor. Lois was already there when I arrived, probably had been for hours. Her usual pristine appearance was gone, hair a mess, eyes wide and frantic. She no longer looked like a community leader. She looked like someone backed into a corner. She paced in front of the building like she was guarding it. Her eyes were puffy, and her body screamed exhaustion. Her outfit was wrinkled, makeup smeared, and she kept checking her phone like she expected a cavalry of lawyers to appear any second. There was a half-empty thermos by her car and the remains of what looked like an untouched fast food breakfast. She kept glancing toward the street, clearly hoping for a last-minute rescue, but there was no one. Just her alone, finally forced to face the consequences of decades of unchecked control. The moment she spotted me, she started yelling before I even stepped out of the car. "This is theft. You can't just take our community center. That's our building." I stayed cool. Didn't rise to it, even though part of me wanted to remind her she tried to steal my cabin not long ago. I gave instructions to my team to record everything. Frank's assistant took notes for the legal file. "Mom," I said steadily, "this is a lawful commercial eviction due to unpaid rent. You were given proper notice as required by law." My voice was calm, but my heart was thudding. I knew it was about to escalate. When Lois realized she couldn't intimidate me, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. She clutched it like a lifeline, her voice growing more panicked with each sentence. "He's dangerous. He has men in uniforms," she sobbed. "Real tears this time, maybe." I half expected her to throw herself onto a police cruiser when it showed up. She wept like a soap opera villain trying to land a bigger role. "There's a man here with security guards trying to steal our community center," she cried into the phone. "He's threatening us and refusing to leave." I stared at her, stunned. The nerve to accuse someone of theft while standing on property I legally owned was almost impressive. She kept stealing glances at the small crowd of neighbors that had started gathering, playing to them like a stage. She made sure her tears were seen, her pleading voice heard. She even added some flair, pointing at me dramatically, clutching her chest like she was having heart palpitations, stumbling as though grief had robbed her of balance. It was expert-level manipulation. And honestly, if I hadn't known the full story, I might have believed her too. By the time the police pulled up, it looked bad. A security team in uniform, a middle-aged woman crying, and a confused audience gathering to watch the chaos unfold. It was exactly the kind of situation that could spiral out of control in an instant. And for a brief moment, I feared I'd made a grave error. My voice sounded steady, but my heart wasn't. One slip of the tongue and I'd be wearing handcuffs. Then, one of the officers said something, and my stomach dropped like an anchor. For a heartbeat, I truly believed I was going to be arrested for evicting someone from a property I legally owned. That's the illusion the HOA perfected. Inflate the lie until it's loud enough, and someone always buys it first. For one breathless moment, it looked like Lois's scheme had worked. I was possibly about to be detained for simply trying to enter my own legally acquired building. But I kept calm and passed the folder to the legal assistant. "Officer, everything you need to make sense of this is right here," I said. "I'll wait in my car while you review it." I didn't know if I was being smart or incredibly naive, but I figured the truth had to count for something. And if it didn't, I had bigger problems than I thought. The lead officer examined the documents piece by piece while his partner spoke with each of us separately. Included were legal proof of my ownership of the clubhouse, a copy of the rent, increased notifications sent by certified mail, the non-payment notice, and eviction warning, security footage capturing Lois's hostile behavior on the property in under 15 minutes. The facts had sorted themselves. It was obvious who was lying and who was telling the truth. Meanwhile, a 52-year-old local nurse had been recording everything on her phone. "That's him," she said, standing about 10 feet away. "He's been honest from day one. I've seen her scream at kids. This stops now." Her footage captured Lois making false claims to the officers and behaving erratically. That video later became pivotal in my legal case. She'd been watching from her kitchen window, but once the squad cars pulled up, she grabbed her phone and came outside. Turns out, she'd been documenting Lois's actions for months, waiting for the right opportunity to speak up. When the officer finally told Lois that I was the lawful owner of the property, her entire narrative unraveled. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising in panic. "He's tearing our community apart. This building's been ours for 15 years. He can't just take it." She even reached for the officer's arm, which did her no favors. "You've got to arrest him. He's a criminal." At that point, I almost felt sorry for her. The desperation was that raw. The officer gave Lois a firm warning about filing false reports and disturbing the peace. His partner spelled it out plainly. I had every legal right to determine who could access the property. "Ma'am," he said, "if this gentleman owns the building, he controls who uses it. That's how ownership works." As the police drove off, I walked to the clubhouse and unlocked the door with my new set of keys. Lois stood there, stunned into silence, her mascara streaked and her lips trembling. But something about that silence was more chilling than any lie she'd told. I knew she wasn't finished, not even close. 2 weeks after the 911 call, Frank and I officially filed a multi-count lawsuit against Lois Granger and the HOA board. The charges: fraud, for inventing a bogus landscape fee; defamation, for spreading lies about my finances; property interference, for illegally listing my cabin; harassment, for waging a deliberate campaign to force me out. Didn't just bring a pile of evidence. We brought surgical precision. Each piece was a scalpel, clean, sharp, undeniable. Every lie Lois told had a matching document. Frank had compiled the evidence in color-coded binders that looked more like surgical trays than legal folders. Every page was numbered, cross-referenced, and backed up 3 times over. Then, 3 days before our first hearing, Frank received a phone call that changed the game. A 28-year-old former HOA assistant reached out through a mutual contact, offering information that could blow the whole case wide open. I remembered her. A young woman leaving the HOA office with a box in her hands and tears in her eyes about 1.5 years ago. Everyone said she'd quit, but no one said why. Now I knew. And it was far worse than I'd imagined. Frank arranged for us to meet. The next morning, I spent that entire night wondering what kind of bombshell she was about to drop. At our meeting, Jod laid out the full extent of Lois's criminal operation. Over $80,000 in HOA funds embezzled over 5 years, multiple fake fees invented to hide the theft, a plan to sell my cabin to her friend for $50,000 under value, with Lois pocketing a $25,000 finder's fee; threats against board members who asked too many financial questions; a pattern of punishing residents who threatened her control. "I stayed quiet for 1 year," she said, lifting a flash drive. "But when she started doing it again, I stopped sleeping. My throat dried up. I thought I'd been furious before, but this was something deeper. Grief, almost. Lois hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen trust. But Jod didn't just know about the crimes, she documented them. Before quitting, she secretly copied financial files, recorded Lois admitting to illegal acts, saved emails showing the conspiracy to steal my property. I couldn't sleep knowing what she was doing. 2 people, she said. I kept hoping someone else would speak up, but no one did. So I preserved the proof. For over 1 year, she'd been carrying a flash drive filled with damning evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. After Jod's statement went public, other residents began speaking up. Stories came out of fake violation notices sent to people who questioned Lois, rules enforced selectively based on personal vendettas, threats aimed at anyone who opposed her financial discrepancies that board members were told to ignore. Floodgates opened. I realized I wasn't her first victim, just her latest. The cabin was merely her opening play. Lois had built a machine ruthless, efficient, and I'd finally jammed a wrench into its gears. A forensic accountant reviewed 5 years of HOA records and uncovered the full extent of the theft. The landscape enhancement fee was just the latest in a string of bogus charges used to pad an off-book slush fund Lois had fabricated. Maintenance fees that covered no maintenance legal expenses for cases that didn't exist, community projects that were never carried out. Money had flowed into private accounts she alone controlled before being funneled into her own finances. Lois hired a pricey defense lawyer who tried to argue I had set her a pan that every HOA decision had been for the community's benefit. In her deposition, Lois stuck to her script. She was the protector, I was the outsider. But then Frank played the recording. Her voice, crystal clear, will split the difference once escrow closes, caught mid-theft, in her own words. Then came the real blow. Evidence of a secret profit-sharing deal with her friend Margaret. Lois had never disclosed it. A clear, enormous conflict of interest. When confronted with the audio of her planning to divide the proceeds from the stolen cabin, she literally sat speechless for over a minute. It was all in the transcript. The judge set the final hearing for the following Tuesday. As we left the courthouse, Lois looked cornered, defeated, but calculating. Her lawyer whispered frantically in her ear, likely explaining just how deep the hole had become. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I didn't feel triumphant. I just had one haunting thought. What would she do before Tuesday? The courtroom on Tuesday was buzzing. Press lined the benches. An HOA board member fidgeted in a suit that didn't fit. This wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning. I was nervous, even with the truth on my side. Court can be unpredictable. Lois's lawyer had been filing last-minute motions about technicalities and jurisdiction. The bailiff had to quiet the crowd. I'd never been the center of attention like this. It was exhilarating and terrifying. The judge entered with a presence that shifted the entire room. Her robe seemed to carry justice itself. And just when it seemed we'd heard it all, Frank stood and dropped the final bomb. Your Honor, we've uncovered a document that changes the nature of this case entirely. He presented the original will of the businessman who'd created the trust fund that owned the clubhouse. I thought I knew everything at that point. I didn't. The courtroom fell into total silence as Frank explained what the will meant. The judge leaned forward. Even the court reporter paused. The will stated, the clubhouse was meant to serve the community. Rent was only to cover maintenance, not for profit. Any HOA president who knowingly defied that mission should be removed. Immediately heirs what sealed Lois's fate. She had known about the will for 2 years. Frank had found it with her handwritten notes in the margins about how to sidestep its restrictions. Then the 52-year-old nurse testified on behalf of dozens of residents. Without Mr. Bishop's courage, she said, we'd never have known what our HOA was hiding. We trusted her and she betrayed us. The investigation revealed a neighbor forced to move after discovering financial inconsistencies, residents hit with fake violations for asking tough questions, an elderly couple so relentlessly harassed they sold their home at a loss. Pattern wasn't just evident, it was undeniable. Anyone who challenged Lois got crushed through lies, fees, and social exile. Lois tried to salvage her image on the stand. I protected this community, she said. Property values rose 40% under me. Mr. Bishop doesn't understand our values. The judge wasn't moved. Mrs. Granger, she said coldly, you raised property values on a foundation of lies and intimidation. Real leadership protects people, it doesn't prey on them. Lois shrank in her chair. Her lawyer tried to object. The judge silenced him with a glare. Then came the verdict. 18 months in county jail for fraud and embezzlement, 3 years probation, and community service, $127,000 in restitution, $45,000 in legal fees to me, $25,000 in damages for harassment and defamation, $18,000 in court costs and interest. Lois would have to sell her home to pay everything she gained illegally. Gone. The judge ordered a full audit of 10 years of HOA records, future financial oversight by an independent firm. Transfer of the clubhouse to a resident-run trust was set at $500, just enough to cover maintenance. I could have kept it, rented it, profited, but that was never the point. I didn't fight for income. I fought for fairness, and I honored the will's vision. I gave the clubhouse back to the people. I never wanted to ruin anyone. I just wanted them to follow the rules and treat others with decency. Sometimes, to rebuild something better, you have to tear down what's rotten. And that's exactly what we did, in full view of a courtroom that would never forget it. Afterward, the community changed in ways I never expected. An HOA board was elected. The nurse became president. My cabin ownership was officially secured, and I received a written apology from the new leadership. Transparency rules were enacted. Regular town halls were created. Residents finally had a voice without fear. For years, this neighborhood smiled through gritted teeth. Now they clapped for the version of themselves they'd almost forgotten. The change wasn't just structural, it was cultural. Lois, after serving her sentence, left town in silence. Cardboard boxes, plastic bins, and a clipboard sticking out like a tombstone. No one waved. I held a free barbecue at the Clubhouse, now truly the people's. Neighbors who once avoided me came to say thank you. The most powerful moment was when Martinez, my old neighbor, came back. "Grant," he said, "you didn't just save your cabin, you saved the soul of this whole place." Others who had been driven out shared their stories, and some even moved back. The lake didn't sing. It exhaled like it had finally forgiven me. Not the silence of fear, but the calm after a storm that didn't win. And in that hush, I heard, Peace. The kind that stays. Maybe that's the real lesson. When you refuse to back down, you don't just protect what's yours. You show others they can fight, too.